Hello, I am Baal Kadmon, and I'd like to thank you for watching and or listening to this video. Today I'm going to discuss something that is a little bit obscure, surprise, surprise, and it is about the magical fragments of the Cairo Genizah, and I'll get into what a Geniza is. But first, let me tell you a little bit of the history, and then we'll get deeper into this. In January 1897, there was a scholar from Cambridge. His name was Solomon Schechter. And he found this place. He climbed up a ladder into like this windowless room above a synagogue in Cairo, in Egypt. And when he got inside, he was surrounded by paper, like centuries of it. There was, torn Bibles, love letters. There were divorce contracts, business ledgers. I mean, just everything, like school books, and they were all like, tangled up into each other. And there were quite a few different types of texts. And what he saw, which was something really strange, he saw like spells, right? Spells and curses that were written in Hebrew and Aramaic, and various amulets that were used to bind demons. And there were like recipes to gain love and revenge and protection against the evil eye, which was, of course, very common in Jewish practice. Now, that room was called the Geniza. And it was in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Old Cairo. So for thousands of years, the Jewish community there, and there was a very robust Jewish community there, had used it as sort of like a storeroom for any document that carried the name of God, because you're not allowed to just throw those away, right? If there's a text that has a name of God, even a single letter, you can't throw it away, so you had to store it somewhere. And so what happened, it ended up becoming one of the largest surviving records of, everyday Jewish life from medieval Islamic times. So they found somewhere between 300 and 400,000 fragments, imagine. And in that pile, there was just, there was a lot of also just like ordinary paperwork, just pedestrian stuff, but there was thousands of fragments of magic there, like practiced magic. And I've spent a long time sort of looking at these things that are available online. And let me tell you, the Cairo Genizah is one of the most important things that ever happened to the study of Jewish magic. There's no doubt about it. And in this podcast, I'm going to discuss a little bit about that history. So let's first talk about the word itself, right? Geniza. What is Geniza? Right? And it comes from the Hebrew word that means to hide or to store away, right? Ganuz. And Jewish law says that any document with the name of God on it cannot be thrown out, right? You can't have a Torah scroll, even if it's a little bit corrupted, because remember, scribes had to write the Torah scroll exactly, and sometimes they would have a little bit of a mistake in it, and that would actually cancel out the whole scroll. So they couldn't throw it away because there were, names of God in it. So they stored them there. They stored prayer books, but also other things, business letters that just happened to open with some, phrase that had even the initials of, Baruch Hashem, blessed is God, and it was stored there with respect until it can be buried properly. Of course, many of these things were not buried. They were stored there, and no one ever got to them, So a lot of synagogues had a Genizah, and most of them got cleared out or buried, ever so often, which means that the contents were, eventually gone. and we do not have those. But the Cairo Genizah is different. And we don't know why. People sort of argue about it. Part of it seems to be just local belief that taking anything out of the room would bring disaster on someone. This was a very superstitious time. And the Ben Ezra Geniza basically never got emptied, at least not for close to 1,000 years. So by accident, it turned into the largest surviving, I guess you could say, time capsule of medieval Jewish life anywhere on Earth. And the location is a big part of why this is so significant. Fustat, which was in the heart of Old Cairo, where the Ben Ezra Synagogue is, during the Fatimid and Ayyubid periods, roughly the 10th through the 12th centuries AD, Cairo was one of the great trading and intellectual crossroads of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean world, by the way. And that's why the Geniza at Ben Ezra is so full and so rich of all of these documents. Because it didn't just hold religious texts; it held the actual paperwork of, the community, the contracts, the letters, the medical texts. Obviously magic written in Hebrew, and Judeo-Arabic and Judeo-Spanish and Judeo-German. Everything was there. Now, the thing is that sounds, fair enough, pretty clean, but it's actually really messy. Because the synagogue went through a big renovation between 1889 and 1892. And during that work, the contents of the Geniza got disturbed. And really, the truth is, travelers and manuscript dealers had already been pulling fragments out and selling them for years, before Schechter ever showed up in Cairo. A rabbi and dealer in Jerusalem named Solomon Aaron Wertheimer had been shipping bundles of fragments to Cambridge to sell since the early 1890s, and some got bought, but a lot of them got ignored because people didn't know what they had there. Now, there is a strong case made by later historians that the pious book collectors in Jerusalem saw the value of this material, well before, Solomon Schechter did, and that, history simply never gave him the credit he earned. And I think that's worth discussing, because the famous version of this story is a lot cleaner than what actually happened and what people actually record. So what set off, this expedition was actually luck, really. I mean, this wasn't a planned expedition. It was luck. And let me explain what I mean by that. In 1896, there were two Scottish twin sisters, Agnes Lewis and Margaret Gibson. And they were very serious scholars and manuscript hunters in their own right. And they brought some of the Hebrew fragments they had bought in Cairo to their friend at Cambridge. And that friend, was, of course, Solomon Schechter, who was a reader of Talmudic and rabbinic literature. So he knew, he could read this stuff, right? So when he looked at one of these fragments, he realized, some of these were a page of some original book, original Hebrew books. And one of these pages that the sisters had procured was a Hebrew page of the book of Ben Sirah. In the Christian Bibles, that text is called Ecclesiasticus. And in the original Hebrew of it, was, it was hard. We couldn't find them, right? It was lost. The book of Ben Sirah, Ecclesiasticus, was lost for well over 1,000 years, at least in Hebrew. And here he was holding it actually in his hand. And when he saw that, he was like, "Holy shit! There's a ton of stuff and I'm paraphrasing, of course, that needs to be discovered there." So that is what sent him to Cairo in December of 1896, and it was paid for by his, Cambridge colleague Charles Taylor, and he got permission from the chief rabbi Aaron Raphael ben Shimon, and that's where he was then able to go into the Geniza, and he started his enormous job of sort of sorting through everything. So he shipped, oh my God, like almost 200,000 documents, right? The numbers are like 140 to 193 documents, give or take, right? Back to Cambridge. And they became the Taylor-Schechter Geniza collection, named for, Schechter and the person who funded him. And it still forms the core of what Cambridge University Library holds today. Now, Schechter, he couldn't finish the job. I mean, there was too much, right? And nobody did. Later expeditions and later scholars kept, finding more and more fragments. And they're still being cataloged right now, right? Now, there's some Middle Eastern, tension, but no, people are still going though to catalog these things. And Cambridge alone has digitized about 30,000, like 35,000 items, and they add new ones every month. And then there are other pieces of the Geniza that ended up sort of scattered. So they had some in Oxford, some in the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, where I'm from. The John Rylands Library and other places all hold sort of parts of the Geniza. Now, when Schechter and the people around him first went through the Geniza, they were hunting for, lost scripture, because people had an inkling that, the Bible, can't be the only, the texts that we have can't be the only ones. And we already knew about, apocryphal texts and stuff, but they figured there has to be like lost scriptures, religious poetry, lost philosophy, something, And magic was, at that time, and I mentioned this in my course in the Kabbalah, you can actually enroll below. It was just released actually a few weeks from this podcast. To them, at least, the magical text that they found was an embarrassment to them. It was, in their minds, an inconvenient reminder that medieval Jewish communities were practicing folk sorcery right alongside their, formal religious life. So for decades, these magical fragments, they got cataloged and shelved and were mostly ignored by the serious scholarship at the time. But that all changed. And it changed largely because of a single individual who I respect quite a bit, and his work, that is. And his name is Gideon Bohawk. In Hebrew, the name would be Gideon, but Gideon, I'll just call him Gideon. And he was a professor of Jewish philosophy and the Talmud, which is the oral Torah, at Tel Aviv University. And he spent a huge part of his career, editing and finding and publishing the magical material in the Geniza. Now, Bohawk has said that almost 2,000 of the fragments contain magical texts. Now, that's an enormous body of ancient Jewish magic, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. And in his 2008 book, Ancient Jewish Magic, A History, is now one of the standard references in this field. And, I've read it, and, reviewers, have all called it exhaustively researched, and definitely something worth looking into. So I guess the question is, what is actually in these fragments, right? And what is found there is an incredible range of practical magic. There are amulets, small folded texts that you wore or carried on you, that call on the various names of angels for protection against demons, against disease, against the evil eye, or as it is pronounced in Hebrew, Ein Hara. And then there's one surviving Cambridge fragment that protects a man named Eliyahu, which is translated in English as Elijah, but it's not Elijah, the prophet from the Bible. So one of these texts, protects this man named Eliyahu, son of Esther, from sickness, from demons, and from the evil eye. And there's a companion amulet made for the same man in a different handwriting. And then there's another one cataloged as Cambridge manuscript TSK1152, which was written for a man named Shalom, son of Zuhra. And that one was not for protection at all. It was made to give him charm, right? To give him sort of grace and success in business. So it was sort of like a good fortune talisman for this medieval businessman. Essentially, it was made for him. They're also full recipe books, right? Little booklets of magical instructions for all kinds of purposes, love spells, curses, and these are curses against your enemies, spells to open locked doors, spells to, stop people from gossiping, to win court cases, for gambling. One fragment from the 11th century preserves the first and last pages of a booklet, like that, to help you win in gambling. And one of them, it opens with a list of divine names and then gives you a general protection recipe against every demon and every evil spirit. And it's written in, a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic. And this is the part here that I think is most important, that I care about the most, and that Bohawk's work turned up clear evidence of deliberate borrowing across cultures. Jews don't like to admit it, but it's true. They borrowed from other cultures. And of course, they're never going to admit it. And all religions are like this, not just Judaism, but because we're talking in the presence of Judaism, that's why I'm mentioning it. In a landmark study in 1999, Bohawk showed that some of the Jewish magical texts were in direct contact with Greek and Coptic magical traditions. Now, that's a big thing, right? So the same broad magical culture that produced the Greek magical papyri, which I am working on a program as I'm recording this, it's going to be the most comprehensive program on the PGM. So if you are interested, please subscribe to this channel because I will announce it here. So, and look, to circle back to that, I've studied the Greek magical papyri closely for the last several years. So this connection is the piece that grabs me very, every time I read about what was found in the Geniza. The divine names, the technical vocabulary, the whole ritual structure, all of it moved back and forth between Judaism, Greek and Coptic magicians who were working in this sort of the same Egyptian environment, for centuries. So really, I mean, if we're going to go, brass tacks here, magicians of different religions were reading each other's material, right? They borrowed from it, adapted it, and this was long before the Geniza texts themselves were even written. Now, one of the one of Bohawk's most interesting discoveries has to do with a physical format that is almost unique in the whole collection. And this is something also that I discuss in my program on the Greek magical papyri. It's not out yet, but I actually covered a whole lesson on what I'm about to say here. And they are called rotuli. And rotuli, they're sort of vertical scrolls made of parchment. And it is unusual because most of the Geniza material is bound booklet pages or codex pages. So scrolls like these are rare. And I discuss the difference between a codex and a rotuli and all of these things in my PGM course. Again, if you are interested in that, please subscribe to this channel. And if you are on my website, occultcourses.com, just subscribe to it, even if you don't want the free program that I'm offering there. Just subscribe. You're going to find out when this PGM program. If you're already on the list, don't worry about it. You're going to get the email. So the magical rotuli are rare, right? Or even by Geniza standards, right? But the ones that survived are pretty remarkable. There is one intact scroll that runs almost 3 feet long and holds about 145 lines of magical, recipes. And all were written in a single, well-trained scribal handwriting, and it's dated to the early 10th century AD. Now, Bohawk has argued that these scrolls carry major historical weight, and one of them in particular, and that one is held in the Oxford Bodleian Library, and it's cataloged as HEB A3.31, and it is probably among the oldest surviving magical texts from the Cairo Genizah. Now, what makes it special is that it is based almost entirely on much older magical recipes from late antiquity Palestine, right? So these magical recipes seem to have survived, into medieval Cairo without getting updated and without getting, censored by the religious authorities, Jewish and Islamic for that matter. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is because this matters a lot if you care about continuity like I do, right? This one scroll is a direct link between the magic of Jews in Roman period Palestine, which is the same broad world that produced materials closely to the PGM, right? The Greek magical papyri, and the working magicians of medieval Islamic Cairo, 8 or 9 centuries later, right? So Bohawk, these recipes that Bohawk found, he calls aggressive, meaning curses, binding spells, coercive love magic, and that tells you something about how this actually worked, right? Whatever the rabbis said about magic in their official writings, ordinary Jewish communities kept commissioning these magical texts. And I also mentioned something like this in the PGM course that I'm going to reveal about how some of the PGM texts are actually commissioned. But I can't get into that here because otherwise we will be here for hours. So ordinary Jewish people, in the communities, they commissioned these spells, they copied it, they used it, and it was continuous. So for almost 1,000 years. So that's actually quite remarkable. Now, for my money, the single most gripping discovery in this whole field is the story about code breaking. In another study that Bohawk initiated, he identified 2 magical texts from the Cairo Genizah that use a substitute cipher. And as far as he could tell, that cipher does not show up in any other magical tradition anywhere else, right? Somebody or some small circle of Jewish magicians in medieval Cairo invented their own private code to encrypt the sensitive parts of their spellbooks. It's amazing. And then Bohawk found the same cipher on 6 more Geniza fragments. And these 6 were clearly the deliberate cut up remains of the single magical recipe book. Right? These were not separate pieces. They were actually torn apart on purpose from a single document and scattered. And that's most likely because the book itself was seen as too valuable, right, or too sensitive, or maybe, probably too dangerous to leave in one place. And that makes sense. I understand that. So because they're all torn apart, they can't be physically joined back together yet, though Bohawk thinks that might become possible as more fragments of the torn-up collection are found around the world, because remember, these things were scattered around at some point. Now, here is what the code was actually hiding, these cipher codes. In most of these fragments, the bulk of these magical recipes is written, in plain normal script, and the encryption is saved for specific words, right? And that includes like titles, for sensitive details. And in one case, the encrypted part is personalized dream divination request, right? This was part of a request for divination. And it was a spell to summon a truthful dream made by or for a specific woman. Her name was Khatun, daughter of Katsur. Now, these are very Arab names because this was in Egypt, but it's not unusual for Middle Eastern Jews to have Arab names. So Bohawk ends that study hoping that Khatun might one day be identified in another Geniza document. And I want you to sort of think about that for a second, because behind that torn scrap is a real person, right? Khatun, daughter of Katsur, right? That's an actual person who lived nearly 1,000 years ago. And she wanted a true dream badly enough to pay a magician to encode that request for her. So I think that's really important. All right, so let's just step back for a second and look at what these magical fragments really do. And I know a lot of people aren't going to be happy with this, but they sort of knock down the neat little wall that we like to put up between official religion and magic, especially, well, in this case, Judaism, right? You go to an average religious Jewish person and talk to them about magic, they don't want to talk about it. Some of them might not even know about it, right? But this knocks it down. It just shows you, because remember, folk magic has been around forever, since the biblical times, but most people won't admit it. So the people that were using this material were not secret heretics, living outside these communities, right? A lot of them were just ordinary people, right? Mothers, merchants, people in lawsuits, people who are seeking love. They went to these specialists to solve these problems, and it still happens to this day. I know a few religious Jews that's, obviously I can't mention names, but I do have their names, that, go to tarot card readers. Now that's, no. Not in religious Judaism, but they go because they're like these people thousands of years ago, in this case, 1,000 years ago. People, and we do it today, right? All of us, right? We want specialists to solve our problems. I work on my own, but other people hire other people, for sickness or whatever, failing business, love, whatever it is, legal trouble. And these specialists that they hired were working from a magical toolkit that had been moving around the Mediterranean and the Near East for at least over 1,000 years. They picked up Greek stuff and Coptic stuff, Egyptian material as they went. Now, if you want to look, and see some of these artifacts, right, you can go to the Cambridge University Library. They digitized, several thousands of the Geniza manuscripts, and you can just look them up. Just go to the Cambridge University Library, look up, Cairo Genizah, and you will find it there. So that's it for this podcast. I know this was a pretty long, but it's interesting, right? I mean, this is like one of the rarest things that you could find in Judaism. A lot of Jews aren't going to be happy about this. But in either case, I do want to say that my course on the Kabbalah is out. I cover many of these topics from the Jewish, Christian, and Hermetic Kabbalah. There's over 700 videos. Yes, it took me 10 years to create this. So you'll learn more way beyond what we studied here. But if you're interested, you can see the link below. With that, I will see you in the next podcast. Today is August 22nd. I will be going to Colorado and New Mexico in early September. I might have another podcast by then, maybe not. But in either case, please subscribe and you will see future podcasts. And please, again, if you're interested in the Kabbalah course, the link is in the description. With that, I will see you soon. So mote it be.